So, hi team. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So, let us get started. Before we get started, let me give you a brief introduction about myself and the topic. So, first, I will give introduction about myself. My name is Manigandan. In terms of if I talk about my training experience, then I have around 14 years of training experience uh, teaching various kind of cybersecurity courses. So if I talk about my certification, I am a Microsoft certified trainer from the year 2007. I am also an active CISSP, CCSP and ISSAP certification. Along with that, I have also cleared my CEH and certified Chief Information Security Officer certification from EC Council. In terms of my cloud certifications, I have AWS Architect Associate and AWS Security Specialty. So that's pretty much the introduction about myself. So our today's topic is security operation, which is the domain 7 of CISSP. Now this topic, security operation domain 7, it is very much important if you are preparing for CISSP. Along with that, if you are also preparing for CCSP, this topic is very important. So I would request everyone to add this video to your review list. So if you are preparing for CISSP and CCSP, you should definitely check the recordings and revisit the recordings and revisit the topics. Now, before we get started, so a little bit about InfoSec Train, which was a training institute which was started in 2016. Now there are almost they have a cumulative of 15 years of training experience, and they basically conduct cybersecurity certifications in many areas, and these are their trusted clients. Now, coming back to the agenda. So basically your InfoSec Train, they are already a Microsoft certified partner. Along with that, they are also, if you are planning to go for CompTIA or EC Council certifications, ISACA or certifications like CIPP, they are official training partner for IAPP and all. Now, the agenda for today's and tomorrow topics is basically incident management, BCP DR plans, type of intrusion detection system, and the RAID volumes. So today majorly we will try to actually cover the incident management, and the remaining topics like BCP DR plans, types of IDS, RAID volumes, these all things we can cover tomorrow. Now, if I am talking about the incident preparation, now incident according to the NIST special publication 800-61 revision 2, event is an observable occurrence in a system or network, like a user connecting to a SharePoint server farm. Now, one thing which you need to understand is that every incident is an event, okay, but not every event is an incident. Now, live example I can give you is, so let's say you guys enrolled into a Splunk SOAR training program. Okay, you went to a training partner and you enrolled into a Splunk SOAR training program. Now, the training is supposed to start at from Monday to Friday between 8 p.m. to 11. Okay, the training is basically for 5 days, Splunk SOAR, and it's supposed to start at 8 p.m. to 5 p.m. Sorry, 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. for 2 hours. So if the training starts on time, okay, so basically 5 minutes before the training, the trainer starting the meeting, checking that his mic and internet connection is stable, getting prepared with the slides, with the practicals, with the lab guides, whatever thing is needed for him or for her to deliver the training. That is basically, so if the training is starting on time, that is basically considered as an event because it is occurring on a particular time. But if that same training, instead of 8, it is happening, it is starting at 8:10, 8:15, 8:20, there is a delay. Now that kind of delay is considered as an incident, because you are not, so when I say an incident, anything which leaves a negative impact on the organization, anything and everything which leaves a negative impact on the organization is considered as an incident. Okay, so now like a user connecting to a SharePoint server farm, now this is, if the user is connecting to the SharePoint server farm during normal business hours, then definitely it is not an incident, right? It's an event. A user connecting to a VPN between normal working hours, Monday to Friday, between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., that is definitely considered as an event. It is not considered as an incident. But if the same employee is connecting over the weekends during non-business hours, okay, or during public holidays, and they are trying to touch a sensitive database which contains some, sensitive data like your PII, PHI data, then that is something which is considered as your incident. Any abnormal event, yes, any abnormal event which is impacting the organization can be said that it is considered as an incident. Yes, anything unusual. So now when we are talking about negative, so not necessarily every event is an incident. So an incident can cause adverse impact on the system or on the organization. So like some of the negative consequences which we have, it can lead to a system slowdown or crash. Like live example, a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack, a DOS attack, a cross-site request attack, or a cross-site request forgery attack. These are all kind of your incidents. A phishing attack is considered as an incident. So incident is basically a violation or a threat of violation which can be your related to your computer security policies. It can be related to your acceptable use policies. So acceptable use policies means what? So like any whenever we change the job, whenever a new asset is allocated to us, now that asset can be your company provided laptop, a company provided desktop, or a company provided phone. We basically sign an acceptable use policy that how the device should be used. Like one normal thing is like you should not access social networking websites like your Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn from the company provided desktop. If you found social networking websites running on the company provided desktops, then that will basically, it's a violation. It's a violation of acceptable use policies, and in regards to this, your employment with the organization will be terminated. So now when we are talking about the acceptable use policy, so incident is a violation or a threat of violation which can, it can be related to your computer security policies, it can be related to your acceptable use policies, it can be, now if I have to give another example of the acceptable use policies, now you cannot run Wireshark or any kind of, monitor. So like if you are trying to run a TCP dump or Wireshark on a AWS or Azure public cloud, which can which is intercepting, because a cloud is a kind of a multi-tenant environment, so you cannot run any kind of monitoring tools like Wireshark or Nmap or these kind of tools, because that's a direct violation of the acceptable use policies. So the preparation, so now when we are talking about an incident preparation, the first stage in an incident management is your incident preparation. Yes, the event is declared as incident after the investigation, that is correct. So the preparation phase should align the organizational policies on data protection with the security goals and the technological defenses. At minimum, you must ensure that employees have received information security staff awareness training. So it is mandatory. Now you must have noticed that in every organization, whether it is for new employees or whether it is for the existing employees, for all kind of new and existing, irrespective of whether they are third party employees, contractors, consultants, attending the security training and awareness program is mandatory for all of them. And if you must have noticed that the content of the security training and awareness program gets revised every year, so there will be always some kind of new content which will be added. So it is a must. So you need to prepare, you need to let your employees it should be mandatory for all the employees to attend the security training and awareness program, whether it is existing employees or whether it is any new employees joining the organization. But how can you measure the effectiveness of the security training and awareness program? That is a $1,000,000 question. How can you measure the effectiveness? The answer to this question is the number of incidents which are raised before the security training awareness program and after. So let's say if the count of incidents which was raised by the employees before the security training and awareness program, that was 20. So now after employees attending the security training and awareness program, the count of incidents has been increased from 20 to, let's say, 50 or 60 or 100. That is an indication that now people are more aware. Yes, the people are more aware of the latest security threats and incidents, and they are coming ahead and reporting it. So this is how you track the this is how you basically track the effectiveness of your employees against the security incidents. Now when we are talking about the incident preparation phase, just a second. So the first thing is, now when we are talking about, now what are the tools which are required for the incident response? Now the tools which are required for the incident response are basically your smartphones and satellite phone. Now you might be wondering, why do we even need the satellite phone? Well, the reason why you basically need a satellite phone is, let's say tomorrow your data center is located in Japan and there is a earthquake or there is a seismic activity which has completely destroyed the cell towers, so you do not have any way to communicate. So in that cases you need to have the satellite phones because your cell towers are not going to be operational. Now for any kind of incidents there has to be a contact list. So now why do we need a contact list? So basically, like in my organization, I am leading the team, for I am leading the incident response team. So if I am not available or if I am on vacation, then who should be the next person to whom the incident response team should call to inform about the incident? So you need to have a contact list of all the people along with their phone numbers, not only their primary but even their secondary numbers updated, so that there can in case of an incident the team can notify the appropriate authorities. And there should be a proper step. Yes, it is called as a checklist, and there should be a proper steps for on call or how to escalate the incident results, how you are going to escalate the incident. So now when we are talking about an incident reporting mechanism, so effective tracking system is very important for tracking the incident. So we must have a command center. Now what is basically a command center? It is basically a standardized on scene all risk incident management concept, where you can integrate the organizational structure to match the complexities and demands of single or multiple incident without being hindered by the jurisdictional boundaries. And you also need to have a forensic team in place to collect the evidence in case if you want to submit this evidence in the court. Now one another thing which is important is that whenever you are defining the incident management policy, okay, everything in the organization starts with the policy. So first is we need to have an incident management policy. Now one thing which you need to remember from the exam point of view as well as from the knowledge point of view as well, that is, whichever whatever risks, threats and vulnerabilities you have discovered during your risk assessment or during your BIA, business impact analysis, which is exceeding the risk appetite level, those should be given. Your incident management plan should have controls to minimize those risks. So basically whatever risk has been identified which can impact or which can increase the risk appetite level of your organization, those must be added in the incident response plan. This is a very important thing which you need to remember from the exam point of view. Okay, so that is the reason why we say that the risks, threats and vulnerabilities which can impact your BIA needs to be given highest priority in the incident response plan. Now, when we are talking about incident preparation, so everything in the organization starts with a policy. So first you need to have an incident management policy, which is a, now the $1,000,000 question comes that who is going to prepare this incident management policy? Well, in the organization, if you have an information system security manager, okay, or if you have a CISO, they are the one who is basically going to prepare the incident management policy. Now the incident management policy, so policy will be prepared by an information system security manager, but it will be approved by the senior management and the stakeholders. So building a strong team who has a good amount of experience into the incident response stages, okay, or how to investigate the incident, that is a man, it's how, so basically the first step in the incident preparation is your policy. Once you have defined the policy, the second important element is to build a strong team which should have the technical, which should have a good amount of technical experience to investigate the incident, who knows which tools to be used to investigate the incident, who can basically perform the threat hunting and all. You should build a strong team which should include the technical expertise, communication, so there should be people who should notify the authorities, and plus the incident management, the incident response team should be led by a project manager. So the project manager should know when to invoke the incident response team and when to notify the authorities. So now when we are talking about the build the strong team, it will include the senior management, any representative from senior management. It will basically include the subject matter expert. So now when I am talking about subject matter expert, so subject now there are different kind of tools which are available nowadays in the market, which by which we can perform the incident detection, or we can respond to the incident. Some of the famous tools you guys must have already heard about, that we have a IBM QRadar. So using SIM, security information and event management, we can perform the incident detection. Okay, you can also do the forensics investigation by using your IBM QRadar. The same capability is even available with the Splunk. Okay, so in Splunk we basically have something called as a Splunk enterprise security. And if you are one of those if you are working for the organization, now you must have heard about a new tool coming in the market which is called as your SOAR, security orchestration automated response, where basically you are trying to automate the incident response capability, because the ultimate effective. So how can you tell, can anybody tell me that how much time they are taking to contain the incident? That talks about, yes, that talks about the effectiveness of your incident response team. Yes, reporting as well. So reporting, along with that, how much time your incident response team is taking to contain the incident or to respond, that talks about the effectiveness. So that is the reason why we basically, because timely reporting and timely response to an incident is very critical for the incident response team. Now I can give you a use case for this. Let's say that you get a phishing email. Okay, your Office 365 received a phishing email, and you have received around 10,000 emails. Okay, now you must have blocked your network team or your firewall team. They must have extracted the email header, identified the sender IP, and they would have blocked that particular URL or IP, so that further spam emails cannot come from that same IP or domain name. But it is equally important that whichever mailboxes we have already received that phishing email, we must have a process to remove those emails from all the mailboxes, so that no one accidentally clicks on that URL. So that is the reason, in many of the, irrespective of any kind of SOAR tools you use, you basically use your IBM Resilient or Splunk SOAR or any other, they basically have a use case where how you can implement a email phishing use case, where in case if a phishing email arrives, it is not only going to notify, but there is something called as a dynamic playbook creation, where we can create the playbook and we can remove all the phishing emails from all the mailboxes who have received it. So this kind of automations is something which we can do. So this is where comes your subject matter experts. Along with that, we need involvement of the support staff, human resources, legal staff, public relations. So now why do we need human resources? So let's say if your incident is, why do we need the HR team? The HR team is needed. So let's say if there is a disaster which has struck and we need to, in order to restore everything, we need to plan people who can come in 3 shifts. So now how the employees are going to, rotate in, which employees are going to come in which shifts, then arranging the, arranging the transport for the employees. All these are the responsibilities of the human resources. Now why do we need the legal staff? Legal staff is there to analyze the impact, whether we need to notify the authority. So now let's say if you are collecting a PII data from the EU citizen, for an EU citizen, so definitely as per the GDPR, what is the notification frequency? What is the notification frequency? 24 hours, 48 hours, or 72 hours for GDPR? It is 72 hours. It is actually 72 hours. So all these things you need to, so your legal staff needs to basically identify all this. Plus, if you are notifying the authorities, then you need to have a public relation officer who is going to notify the authorities. Along with that, who is going to notify the media, right? Because not every details are revealed to the media. We don't reveal every details to the media. Only the thing which is required, that only we reveal. So all these are the pillars of building a strong team. So the first step in the incident management, as it is stated in the ISO 27000 to 2013, is to delegate the responsibilities and procedures. In this place only we define the responsibility metrics, that who is going to be responsible and what procedures we are going to follow. Then we are going to assign these responsibilities to the individuals like SOC analysis, who must be trained during an incident. So now when we are talking about assigning responsibilities to the individual like SOC analysis during an incident and set forth procedures that must be followed. So now one of the another reason why today in the majority of the SOC team we basically use sophisticated tools like SOAR and all, because majority of the SOC analysis, when the SOC analysis receives an incident, they don't know what kind of workflows, what kind of things they need to do this, what kind of steps they need to do next. So that is the reason why we use the SOAR tools, so that we can create, along with the dynamic playbook, we can also create a workflow which can guide the SOC analysis, that what is the first thing which they need to do. So like if there is a, if I have an asset, if I have an endpoint which has been impacted with the virus, so the first thing which the asset, the incident SOC analysis, whoever SOC analysis receives that incident, to perform an active directory lookup to identify that this asset has been allocated to which user, then to perform a CMDB lookup, then to perform an asset inventory lookup to identify more details about that asset. These are some things which the SOC analysis should do. So how can we make sure that the SOC analysis or my SOC team is able to contain the incident in a lesser time? We do this by creating the workflows. So I am trying to map the incident preparation phases with live examples so that it will be better for you to understand that. Now, when we are talking about incident preparation, it is not only, many people they think that incident preparation is not only talking about incident response comes once an incident has happened, but there is something called as a preventing incidents as well. So by integrating our SIM solution with like your active your IBM Watson, or by X-Force Exchange, taking machine learning, user behavioral analytics and all, we can actually prevent that incidents from happening, because they do an historical analysis of our data, where they identify anything which is impacting our CIA. It is analyzing our network, analyzing the host, and identifying what are the risky activities. So you must have seen, if you guys have any experience in the SIM tool, in SIM basically nowadays majority of your SIM tools, they basically come with your user behavioral analytics, where you must have seen that they basically try to identify the risky users. So that you will get to know that, in the dashboard, basically you will get something like top 10 risky users, or top 10, log sources which where too much amount of false positives is coming, or top one another example is top 10 database servers where most of the DML DDL commands are being coming, stored procedures are getting executed. So these are all actually the work of your user behavioral analytics, which is runs in the background with the help of machine learning. So with the help of your integrating your machine learning with your incident management capability, we can also prevent the security incidents from happening. So now we can basically, with the in the incident preparation phase, as I have already mentioned, when you conduct your risk assessment, after you do the BIA, once you conduct the risk assessment, whatever risks you have identified, during your risk assessment, which can impact your BCP or which can impact your BIA, those needs to be added in the incident management policy. We need to do the malware prevention. Now for malware prevention, we will have different kind of malware prevention policies, like anti-malware agent installed on the endpoints and all. Along with that, we will also have a user training and awareness. So it doesn't matter how much sophisticated tools you use, but unless and until your employees are trained, your sophisticated tools are not going to be useful in any sense. So basically, there is a saying that there is no patch for human stupidity. So what is the prevention of an incident is achieved through a comprehensive and okay well designed security plan that basically minimizes the attack surface. So as I have mentioned, now whenever we are talking about incident management, now we have an incident response. Okay, we have an incident response. Along with that, we also have something. So the ultimate goal, I repeat, the ultimate goal of the incident response team is to contain the incident. How effective the incident response team is, it will determine how much time they are taking to contain the incident or to report. So this is the primary factor of the incident response team. So Mahesh, BIA is something which we do to identify what are the critical assets in our organization, or in a normal layman language, these are called as your crown jewels. Okay, now when I say crown jewels, so anything and everything which is collecting sensitive data, like your PII data, PHI data, this is all live example of your crown jewel. So any databases which is storing PII, PHI data, financial data, these are all considered as a crown jewel. So you need to, when you do the BIA, the business impact analysis, you can identify that what are the critical assets which needs to which should continue to run even if there is a disaster. Okay, now one live example I can give you, Mahesh, like during COVID lockdown. Okay, the hospitals and the hospitals along with the medical shops, all these were open even though there was a COVID lockdown. So that is the result of the BIA, that what are the critical departments which should continue to function. And now when I am performing gap analysis means, in order to deliver that function, what is the current functionality we are having and what is the gap which we need to fix. So that is what it is. Now when we are talking about your incident detection, so once you have created the policy, the next is your incident detection. So it alerts about the incidents which can come from various log sources, such as your SIM. It can be your IBM QRadar, it can be your ArcSight, it can be your Splunk Enterprise, firewall, gateways, and IDS. Now every organization, they have a dedicated, they have a different kind of every organization, they basically have a separate way of creating incidents or tickets. Now why I am saying that every organization have a separate way of creating the incident, now let me give you a live use case for that. Now when I'm talking about custom, so anyone who has worked in the sim tool, so you must have seen or you must have observed that in the sim, whenever we try to integrate any log sources, it creates a huge amount of incidents or offenses. Sometimes the amount of events are so high that it basically increases the EPS level. Whatever the EPA event per second licenses we have applied, it increases that as well. So that is the, so in those cases, what we do, instead of creating incidents for each and every event which we are getting on the sim, we basically try to fine tune the rule, so that only when the correlation happens, that time only it should trigger a rule. So now one live example I can tell you for custom raising incidents or tickets is, so when the count of failed logins exceeds 10, okay, I'm just giving an example, when the count of failed logins exceed 10 in the last 15-minute interval from the same source IP to multiple destination IP, if this entire thing matches, then only you create an offense. Okay, if the count of failed logins is not 10, if it is like 5 or 6, then you don't create. So this is a kind of like a stateful rule which we basically create. So now when you are creating rules in the sim solution, you have to be more you have to create more and more stateful rules so that the EPS licenses can be saved. So now in this case, detection devices, so we need to, in order to detect the incidents, again we need to use the detection devices like smoke or motion sensor. We need to have a proper law enforcement and external parties. Now any live example of law enforcement, now you must have seen in the Hollywood movies. Okay, specifically one famous movie which I'm sure everyone in this batch would have seen, The Dark Knight, the Joker movie, the Dark Knight one, in which there is shown the first scene with the Joker, where they show the bank robbery. So in any kind of bank robbery, you must have seen that there is a hidden alarm. The moment they press that hidden alarm, it basically sends a notification to the law enforcement. So that's a live example of a law enforcement or external parties. Okay, software and hardware vendors in form of email intimating about new vulnerabilities and threats. Then what are the vulnerabilities? So now if we are talking about from the software or hardware vendor, so like if you are performing a commercial of, if you are acquiring a commercial of the shelf products, then the commercial of the shelf product may have its own new vulnerabilities and threats. Now what is the problem with the COTS product? Because we do not have the source code, so there is no way to inspect the source code. We only have to rely on the dynamic application security testing, or we have to rely on the application security testing. We can integrate our SIM solution with the threat feeds like IBM Watson or Exposed Exchange. And basically, we can take leverage of the user behavioral analytics to identify the, yes, COTS is non-customizable. You are right. But you can actually, Shiva, you can actually acquire, you can actually get assurance by including the software security assurance clause in the contract. Just to let you know. So now what are the challenges? Now, when we are talking about in the incident detection, different attack vectors. So the problem is every day there are new kind of attacks. The volume of log traffic now, even though if you are having a SOC team, okay, even though if you are having a SOC team, which is having, even though if you are having a SOC team which is having a collective strength of 15 people, technically speaking, even though your SOC team is having a collective strength of 15 people, your 15 people are not going to handle 10,000 or 3,000, 4,000 alerts. So this is where we integrate in order to make the SOC analysis job much easier. This is where we integrate sophisticated tools like SOAR. We integrate with the threat force exchange or IBM Watson, so that the machine learning can do the historical analysis and it can give the meaningful data to the SOC analysis, which can help them to perform the investigation. So now the next thing is, so the one of the biggest problem for the incident detection is the lack of skill set and the knowledgeable staff. Now one live example I can give you of the lack of skill set. If today, if you want to go to the market and you want to hire a person who is having experience related to security, information and event management, okay, so it is very easy, because let's say if you are looking for an IBM QRadar, a person who has worked on IBM QRadar, ArcSight or Splunk, enterprise security, you will find a lot of people who are having the similar set of skills. But the moment you say that you want a specific skill, like you are looking for an engineer who are having all these capabilities, along with that they should be trained and certified to use the SOAR as well, to implement the use cases of SOAR. So even today there are very few amount of engineers which are available who actually are having experience into the SOAR, whether it is your IBM Resilient or Splunk SOAR. Okay, integrating. So that is the reason why we say that finding the right amount of people who are having experience, a good amount of experience in the incident response, specifically when it comes to tools, sophisticated niche technology tools like IBM QRadar, Splunk and SOAR, it is a very difficult combination. So incident identification, now when we are talking about the incident identification, we have a two types. One is we have a true positive and one is your false positive. Now one live example of true positive just now I gave you. When the count of failed logins exceeds 10 in the last 15 minutes interval from the same source IP to multiple destination IP, it triggered an offense rule in the SIM solution. That is a live example of true positive. Okay, now what do you mean by true negative? No rule matched and no attack was present. So if there is a DML command, so let's say you are running a one live use case, I can give you for the true negative. Okay, one live example of a true negative I can give you. So let's say you are having a bunch of Oracle database servers and you are taking weekly backups of the Oracle database servers, right? So during your weekly backups, the weekly backup schedule which runs on the Oracle database server, it generates some failed logins. Okay, now you know that this failed login which is being generated by the application, it is actually coming from a service account and it is coming for that particular time period when the backup process is getting executed. So that is a live example of your true negative, because it is not matching. There is no rules which matched and there is no attack which is present. But if I am taking the same use case, it becomes a false positive. So like in my organization where I work, I can give you one live example that we have a process where all database servers, okay, goes for a weekly reboot between midnight 12 to 12:50 over the weekends. We go for a weekly reboot. So we have a process where we say during that weekly reboot, if there is any during that weekly reboot, every Saturday and Sunday between 12 to 12:15 in the midnight, if there is any failed logins coming, there should not be any incidents getting reported. There should not be any incident which should created or which should get created in the SIM solution, because there is no attack present. It's happening due to a reboot activity. But still, if there is offenses getting triggered, that's a live example of false positive. So as a SOC analyst, your life will be mainly, you will 90% of the time you will be actually dealing with false positive and onboarding use cases for true positive. This is where 90% of the time the SOC analysis job is to reduce the false positive and to onboard new use cases, so that when a rule is triggered, it should trigger a violation. Now, what do you mean by false negative? False negative means no rule matched and the attack is present, means you forget to create the rule. There is no rule available. Okay, there was no rule available, but there was an attack. That is the, but still we never got any alert. So ideally your true positive is still okay, but the problem, the if I have to talk about the criticality of this, false negative is much more critical. So now one live use case I will give you from a DAM solution. Okay, from a database activity monitoring, because I have worked on the database activity monitoring tool as a SOC expert for almost 12, 13 years. Now, in database activity monitoring, we basically have two types of rules. Okay, so we basically have a two types of rules. So one is, we basically have your just a second, let me just remember that. Actually I'm forgetting the, just a second, let me actually quickly, yeah, got it. So basically there are two types. One is your selective, okay, one is your selective and one is your non-selective rules, non-selective policy. Okay, this is, I'm just giving an example. Okay, now this example is very much applicable even if you are if you guys are developing rules even in your SIM solution as a SOC expert, okay, for incident detection and all. Now what, in order to explain in you in a simple layman language of selective and non-selective. Selective means, let's say you guys have a policy. Okay, you have a policy. Now in your policy there is 10 rules. Okay, in your policy there is 10 rules. So basically your SIM solution is going to evaluate these 10 rules, and if the event or flow matches any of these 10 rules, it will basically go ahead and trigger an offense. But in case if there is the event and flow which is coming to your SIM solution, if it is not matching any of the rules, it is not going to create any event or offenses. So basically, if you know your environment, if you know your environment, so when I say if you know your environment, you know which is legitimate and which is not legitimate. So if you have a clear understanding, if you have a clear baseline, you go for a selective. But if you do not, so 90% of the time the organization who goes for the SIM solution, they don't know what is normal and what is abnormal, right? So that is the reason we go for a non-selective. So in a non-selective, let's say if your policy contains 15 rules, okay, if your policy contains 15 rules, it will evaluate all the 15 rules, but if there is no match, it will still go ahead and create an offense, because there was no rule. So it will go ahead and create an offense even for the traffic which is not matched. So 90% of the time, all the rules which we create in the SIM or even in the database activity monitoring, this is basically your non-selective rule. It is basically non-selective policy, because we don't know the environment better. We don't know what is what is normal versus what is not normal. So that is what. Now in the SIM solution also, you must have seen that if at any point of time you must have performed an investigation of an offense, there will be multiple rules which will be contributing towards one single incident or one single offense. That's a live example of an incident detection phase only. So, low false negative. This is where your false negative events incidents is triggered. Live example of a false negative events which will be triggered if you have integrated your SIM solution with your what do you call that? We have something called as your IBM X Force or active or threat intelligence feed. So normally when you integrate your SIM solution with the threat intelligence feed, what it basically does is it also appends some rules on your existing policy. So with that, you can actually create, you can start getting alerts even for those rules for which you have not created. It was been added as a part of your integration. Okay, requirements for building a non-selective rule. Now there can be Tamani, there can be n number of requirement for building a non-selective rule. One live use case I can give you. So you should know your crown jewels. So when I say that you should know many SOC analysis, they start focusing on the rules rather than start focusing on the building blocks or reference sets. So now when I say building blocks or reference set, in order to explain you in a normal layman language, I can say, so first you should start populating infrastructure specific data on your SIM solution. Like your SIM solution should have a list of all NTP servers, DNS servers, Active Directory servers, file servers, SharePoint server, database servers, mail servers. All these infrastructure specific lists must be populated. Your network hierarchy should be populated properly. Then only you will be able to, your SIM solution will be able to identify which is local, which is not local, and which is legitimate, which is not legitimate. But the problem is people who are working on the SIM, they forget to populate the respective groups, due to which the number of false positive alerts increases. So now when we are moving to the next stage, your incident detection. So again, documentation is a critical factor for any kind of incident which you are getting. So you should be, the documentation step should include the status of the incident, whether the incident is resolved or it is still in progress. A summary of the incident should be there. Alerts or indicators, what are the alerts and indicators of an incident? What are the related incident? Now you must have, now on live use cases, you must have, if you guys have worked on the SIM solution, in SIM solution we basically have something called as a offense chaining. Okay, we have something called as a offense chaining. So now what do you mean by offense chaining? In the offense chaining means, so let's say we have a source IP. I'm just giving an example. We have a source IP of 1.1.1.1. This is my source IP. Okay. Now, if this and the destination IP is, the destination IP is, let's say 10.1.1.2. Okay, 10.1.1.2. Now there is an offense which is created for this. But if there is already an previous offense with the same, if the source IP was already part of some previous offense, that will be considered as a relative incident. So in SIM we normally call it as a offense chaining. When the source IP or destination IP is already part of another offense, that is called as your offense chaining. So which will basically help us to correlate or cross reference, which will basically help us to correlate or cross reference to identify what was being done in the previous incident or offense, what was the actions which was taken, what was the impact. Okay, we basically must have a process of chain of custody to identify the list of evidence from where we need to collect, and we must have a proper contact information to notify the authorities. Now it is equally important, team, it is equally important that you prioritize the incident. Now when I say prioritize the incident, see, it is not possible for the SOC analysis to investigate all incidents at once. That is something which is not possible. So that is the reason why you need to prioritize the incident. And now again, the prioritization of the incident, again, this can be again it can be lead back to your BIA, to your risk assessment. So now in order to explain you in a simple layman language, let me take a scenario. So let's say, guys, we have a web server. Okay, we have a web server. Now currently this web server is experiencing a DOS attack. This web server is experiencing a DOS attack. Okay, and the vulnerability, the severity of this is considered, the severity of this is considered as 9. The severity of this is considered as 9. At the same time, we have a database server. We have a database server. let's say we have a MS SQL database server team. Okay, we have a MS SQL database server. Now there is a vulnerability found on this database MS SQL database server, where they are telling that there is a critical patch which is missed. Now the severity of this is considered as 6. Now if you look at the web server and the database server, okay, you see that there is a vulnerability found on the web server which is indicating the severity as 9, and you are seeing a vulnerability found on the database server MS SQL which is having a severity of 6. Which one you will fix first? So basically there might be a more critical data stored on the database server. Now again, how do we prioritize? Because if you see carefully, this scenario is missing one critical factor, that is your AV, which is called as your asset value. It is missing a critical factor which is called as your asset value. Now there might be a possibility, even though the web server has a severity of 9, the asset value of web server is only $1,000. Okay, but the database server has an asset value of 20,000 US dollars. So which means even though there is the vulnerability scoring is only 6, but this has a more impact comparative to this. So as an incident response, your priority should be to fix this one, not the web server. So that is why we say prioritization of the incident. That is the reason on my first slide itself I mentioned that anything which you have identified during your risk assessment which can impact your BIA, those must be added in the incident response stage. Those should be given the highest priority. So now what are the other phases which are there? So basically once an incident is detected, we need to notify the appropriate people. We need to involve the senior management. We need to involve the InfoSec team. We need to involve the system owner, HR, legal, public relation who is going to speak to the public. We need to also make sure that the public relation officer who is speaking to the public, they have proper details available with them. And we have to also make sure that no employees, no internal employees should speak to the media. No internal employees in the organization should reveal sensitive details about the incident to the media and all. We need to notify the regulators, customers, law enforcement. We need to secure our communication by using encryption. We need to notify how we are planning to recover from the incident. Now the notification can be either done via media over the general public, it can be published on the website, it can be sent via email or as a matter of voice email. So now one live example of this voice mail, I can give you one live example. So during COVID, okay, when there was a lockdown, and at any point of time when you used to call anyone, you used to get a recorded message which was, very kind of depressing, a recorded voice mail which you cannot skip. That is a live example of notifying only. That is a live example of a notifying only. So now once your incident detection, once you have created, so now your incident preparation, you have come out with the policy, your incident detection team has basically, confirmed that it is an actual incident. Now comes the incident response stage where we talk about the containment strategy. So now when we are talking about a containment strategy team, live example containment strategy. So live example of a containment strategy during COVID. If someone got tested COVID positive in the RT-PCR test, what is the first thing which we do? We isolate them so that we can save the other people, members of the family. We isolate them completely, either in the home isolation or we admit them in the ICU ward of COVID. So that is talks about the containment. Now even if I am talking about in the previous example the prioritization, also one live example in regards to the prioritization I can give you. So like say if during COVID, if there are 10 patients who are admitted in the COVID yard isolation, the doctor will treat, the doctor is going to prioritize which patient is critical, and based on that, that patient will be attended first, right? So that is also one live example of prioritization. That is also one live example of a prioritization. So now when I'm talking about a containment strategy is talking about containing the incident. So now let's say your system is infected with the your system is infected with the virus. Okay, yeah, ransomware also. So what is the first thing which we do it in the ransomware? We isolate the asset, right? We isolate the asset so that the infection should not be spread to other systems. If there is a patch which is missing, we immediately try to install that patch, right? So these are all live example of your containment strategy. Okay, so tomorrow if your asset is infected with the virus, what is the first thing which we do? We basically we remove the network cable. We remove the network cable and we isolate that particular system. That's a live example of a containment strategy. So it basically depends on the type of incident. Immediate response plus rapid expansion. It's not a solution, but it's a temporary workaround which you are doing. Another technical example of a containment strategy in terms of IT. You guys received a phishing email. What is the first thing your SOC team is doing? Taking the sender IP and the URL and immediately blocking it in the firewall. That's a live example of a containment strategy only. Then after that, you will basically use your dynamic playbooks in SOAR to remove all the phishing emails from all the inboxes which has already been received. But what is the first thing which you do? You basically block. That is what your containment strategy is talk about. So how effective your incident response team is, it basically will determine how effective is your containment strategy and how much time. That is the reason in every organization you must have seen that for all critical incidents we basically have an SLA that within 30 minutes or 40 minutes or 45 minutes we must contain the incident, because the longer response time is you are basically giving an opportunity for the attacker to do more damage. So during your containment strategy, it remains isolated, low level, contained to provide time to prepare appropriate response. So now what are the containment actions? Shutting down the system, disconnecting the network, suspending the business operation, quarantine, sandbox, collecting information about the incident, that how this incident happened in the first place. These are all comes under your containment strategy. These are all comes under your containment strategy. So one live example, if a system is infected with the virus, so I need to perform a root cause analysis that I had an antivirus, I had an anti-malware, I never plugged any USB on my endpoint. Still how my system got infected with the virus. So I need to conduct the root cause analysis that whether the antivirus was updated or not, whether the anti-malware was updated, did I recently install any application on my system from torrent and all these root cause analysis I need to perform to collect information gathering, which will help me to understand, to make sure that this kind of incident doesn't happen in the future. That's a live example of an incident response, technical example. If I have to give a non-technical example, how the patient got COVID into the first place, did he traveled in any public transport, did he went somewhere without wearing the mask or maintaining social distancing? What is his travel itinerary? Did he went to any red zone areas? All these information gathering we will do. So that is a live example of a containment strategy. Now once this is done, so what are the potential challenges? Potential, what is the impact if I leave this system running in production? It may impact the other system which are running on my network, right? So it can impact, just a second. No, disconnecting the network cable is a good example, AD. But shutting down the system is not a good strategy. Now, why I will say shutting down the system is not a good strategy? Because you still need to preserve the evidence to perform root cause analysis, that what when things went wrong, how things went wrong. So now you need to collect forensics data to perform the root cause analysis. Now, if you shut down the system, there might be some critical pieces of sensitive data which is available in the RAM, which may get lost. So that is the reason shutting down the system should never be the option. So in order to mitigate the ransomware, in order to contain the ransomware, again it is the same steps only. You have to disconnect the network cable, or you have to isolate the system so that it cannot impact the other systems. That is the first thing. So whether it's a ransomware incident and all, the containment strategy is going to be same only. Okay, just one live example as I can give you. So we in SOAR, I'm not sure whether you have experience in the SOAR. In SOAR we have something called as a ransomware playbook. Now if you are one of those people who have the access of ransomware playbook, you just go ahead and check the ransomware playbook, irrespective of whether it is Splunk or IBM Resilient or any other. The ransomware playbook is same. It is universal throughout all different tools. Maybe here and there 10-15%, 5-10% changes will be there, but in the end it is all workflow is same only. So now when we are talking about the potential damages to the other system, chained exploit, what would be the impact if I leave that system running in my production network? Okay, how much damage it can do. Containment may affect the integrity of the evidence. So again, someone asked the question, what would be whether we should isolate the network cable or we should shut down the system? Isolating it is much better, because if you are shutting down the system, it is impacting the integrity of the evidence. Continuous availability of the system. So tomorrow if one system is compromised, the other system should be able to function. And finally, what is the time required to recover? So now when we are here talking about time required to recover, here again we are talking about the MTD, maximum tolerable downtime. So it should be less than the maximum tolerable downtime, whichever you have agreed as per your BIA, as per your business impact analysis. That what is the, so in business impact analysis we basically have a RPO, we basically have a RPO, we basically have your MTD, all this. So whatever time you have agreed to recover the system, it should be less than the maximum tolerable downtime. So these are some kind of containment challenges which we have. So now evidence gathering. So now when we are talking about the evidence gathering, immediate documentation, time of the incident, MAC and IP address. Now many SOC analysis, what they do, they only take the IP and MAC address of the physical network adapter. But one thing which you forget is you need to take the evidence when you are collecting the evidence. You should not only collect the MAC and IP address of the physical network adapter, but you have to collect the MAC and network IP address of all the adapter, irrespective of whether it is physical or virtual. Now, a live example I can give you is, if I go to the command prompt and I type ipconfig /all. So as you can see here, I have so many adapters. So I have an Intel Wi-Fi. Okay. Now if you see in this, I have multiple IP addresses. Okay. I have a VMware virtual net adapter. I have a Wi-Fi or direct adapter. So when you are taking evidence, you have to basically collect the MAC and IP address of all the network adapters, irrespective of whether they are primary or virtual. You need to collect the host name, the operating system. You need to collect the model numbers of affected equipment if there is a hardware product. You need to take the location, in which location the incident happened, and you need to take information about the investigator who is collecting all these evidence. And this entire evidence should be protected with the chain of custody at any point of time. I repeat, at any point of time, you basically have to do any investigation on the incident, on the evidence. You have to always do the evidence on the cloned copy, not on the actual copy. The actual copy which you have obtained, it should always be preserved. It should not be you should never conduct investigation on the actual copy. So rather it is advisable that you use the imaging softwares to create an image of the system, and you perform your investigation on the cloned copy rather than touching the actual evidence. Because if you touch the actual evidence and the integrity of the data is compromised, then that evidence will not be acceptable in the court. So that is what your evidence gathering is all about. Now, once you have collected the evidence, the next thing is your eradication. So remove everything related to the incident. It may require a rebuild or replacement of hardware, software, or people. So one live example, people employee committed a fraud. Employee access social networking site on the company provided laptop between 9 to 6. So what is the first thing you will do? You will basically confiscate the asset. You will terminate the employee. But then you terminated the employee, but that employee needs to be replaced with a new employee. So that is a live example of a rebuild or replacement. Okay, your system is impacted with the virus. So what is the next thing you will do? You cannot just install the antivirus and let everything. You have to rebuild the entire system, formatting the system. That's a live example of a software. If your hardware, let's say you are using a laptop, the battery of your laptop is not working or it is not giving proper backup, you replace the hardware. Another live example, real world example. Once a patient is tested for COVID positive, putting him into the 14 days isolation. So where we will give them normal, paracetamol, all this kind of medicine. And then once he has, once that 14 days isolation is completed, we will again take an RT-PCR test to confirm that whether they still have the COVID symptoms or not. That's a live example of an eradication. So this includes resetting the password, implementing the patch, tightening the network parameter, enhancing the logging and analysis using the SIM solution. Now, when I say enhancing the logging and analysis using the SIM solution, by default, your SIM solution only extracts 64 bytes of the payload, whichever type of traffic it is coming. Now, being if you guys are one of those candidates who have worked on the SIM solution, 64 bytes is nothing. If I have to perform URL inspection, if I want to perform URL filtering, then I have to extract much more than 64 bytes if I want to extract layer 7 information and all. So like one live example, your proxy server works on layer 7. Why you are not able to access your websites like Facebook, Twitter? Because there is a proxy which is inspecting the web URL. Layer 7 content inspection is there. So we need to enhance the logging and analysis using SIM, because if we found that our SIM was not able to extract the payload and notify us, then we need to investigate that what is getting lacked. Maybe we need to change the extraction of the payload. We must configure our SIM solution to extract more payload. Now definitely more payload extraction doesn't mean that it is going to be less expensive. Definitely it is going to be more expensive. So is your SIM solution capable enough? Are you having that kind of sizing requirements available to handle that kind of extra load on the SIM? This is also risk assessment you need to do. So you need to enhance your logging and analysis. Then you will determine whether to return. So returning to the normal business operation. So now when we say returning to the normal, failback is a live example of returning to the normal. Failover means restoring from failing over from the primary site to backup site. That's a failover. Failback means backup site to your primary site. That is your failback. Minimize the business impact. Check the user functionality. Make sure that all the infected hosts which was been infected with the virus or ransomware, whatever it is been successfully cleaned. All these are the important stages of the eradication. Now the next is your, now once you have done the eradication, now the next is researching the attack. This is where you will use your machine learning, like your active threat analytics, okay, or your user behavioral analytics, machine learning, to identify what went wrong, how things went wrong, and what you could have done to prevent this incident from happening. So you are going to research the attack. So third party investigators, law enforcement, verify that the IP address came from which country, determine what kind of attack signatures it was there. Yes, root cause analysis, you are right. Okay, whether it was a 0-day attack or not. Review the dark web and hacker forum for more information about the attack. You can in fact even look for the if you are using Linux forums and all, if you are active participant in the Linux forums and all, you can check the Linux forums, does anyone has any. And then you have to do the post incident activity. So in the post incident activity, you learn and improve. So you do the lessons learned, you do the root cause analysis, what happened, what was done, and how well the incident was handled, whether whatever guidelines or procedures which was established to handle the incident, whether everything was being followed by the incident response team. If there is a gap, how to improve that gap. We basically do the in the lessons learned stage. So now in the lessons learned stage, we keep on doing this activity of lessons learned until and unless there is only one answer to why this incident happened in the first place. So you can say that we basically do the root cause analysis. So like I was explaining, that there is two things. One is your incident response team. The ultimate goal of the incident response team is to contain the incident. And then we also have something called as a PMR, which is called as a problem management record. The problem management record is something which is, here we do the root cause analysis to identify what things went wrong, how things went wrong, and what we could have done to prevent this incident from happening, which is also called as your problem management. So we have an incident management and we have a problem management. The ultimate goal of the problem management is to identify the root cause. To identify the root cause. So that is what your researching the attack is all about. Now, the next important thing which we have to discuss is your RAID volumes. Okay. Now, when we are talking about RAID volumes, redundancy array of independent disk. Yes, Soumya, it is important to document the incident timeline. Otherwise, how you will, uh, prove this in the court if you have if evidence has to be submitted. So now the next is team, we have a RAID volumes, which is any cross check. For that, the cross check can be actually done by your whoever is leading the incident response team. It can be done, it can be either checked by your project manager or it can be actually checked by the team lead. Okay, and you can actually track the SLA. You can actually track that whether proper SLAs is being met or not. Yes, so their activities are also monitored. You are correct. So let me give you one live example, like in some support projects. So this is one live example which I have observed. Yes, it is available in these tools, Sneha. One live example, so all these product support companies like IBM or your Cisco or your Splunk, they basically have their entire ticketing solution hosted on Salesforce. Okay, so this is one live example I'm giving. So in Salesforce, so we basically, in every product or organization, they have a SLA where they say any kind of P1 tickets, priority one ticket, immediate response to the customer should be given within 10 to 15 minutes. By the time within 10 to 15 minutes, the moment a ticket is created in the support website. So basically, the moment when a ticket is logged by a customer, the moment any engineer receives that ticket and he or she opens that ticket, they automatically get dispatched to that ticket. It means it starts keeping a counter. It immediately starts a timer clock which says, which tracks how much time that engineer took to review the incident and send email first contact to the customer. And this is compensated, this is also compensated with a reward system. So let's say if an engineer has the SLA is 15 minutes, but the engineer made an initial contact within 10 minutes, and if the engineer does that for 3 consecutive tickets, they basically get a reward of 5,000, or they basically get a PlayStation or iPhone or something like that. So this is a kind of like a performance reward reprisal which some organizations I have seen they used to follow. So now when we are talking about the RAID volume stream, so RAID is your redundancy array of independent disk. RAID volume is an example of fault tolerance or high availability. The answer is fault tolerance, because RAID is happens in a single server. HA, high availability, live example is your cluster between two different servers. So your AWS management console, your Azure management console, your GCP, they are all live example of your high availability between servers. RAID volume provides fault tolerance within a single server. Okay, now there are, when we are talking about RAID, now there are two types of RAID volumes. Even in RAID, there are two types of RAID. Any idea what are the types of RAID? Now I'm not talking about RAID 1, RAID 5 and RAID 0. I'm talking about the type of RAID, not the volumes of RAID. There is a very thin line difference between the types and the volumes of RAID. Well, there is a software RAID and there is a hardware RAID. Now, what is the difference between a software RAID and a hardware RAID? Software RAID is something which is configured within the operating system. Now, your operating system can be your Red Hat or it can be your Windows server. Okay. Software RAID is something which we configure within the operating system. Okay, hardware RAID is something which we configure it from the BIOS. So normally your NAS, your storage area network, sandbox and your NAS, they all have hardware RAID. So we basically have something called as a 𝒁𝒂𝒕 interface, which is called as your small computer system interface. 𝒁𝒂𝒕 controller card or 𝒁𝒂𝒕 interface you must have heard about. With this, we basically configure the hardware. So in terms of performance wise, your hardware RAID is much more performance oriented. It provides much more performance than your software RAID. Okay, so now when we are talking about your redundancy array of independent disks, now one thing, okay, now tell me, uh, when we are talking about your how many hard disks we can basically attach on a single system. I'm not talking about a laptop and all. My question goes way older. This is, I'm talking about between 2005 2006 and all. How many hard disks we can attach on a single system? Actually, the answer is we can have 4 hard disks attached on a single system. If I'm talking about the hard disk types, there was your ID disks, then there was SATA, then now this is now we have your SSD drives. So in that olden times where we used to have this Windows 95, Windows 98, we basically have ID disk. So primary master, primary slave, secondary master, secondary slave. There was a cable. I am not sure if you guys have seen it. So in your olden computers, we basically can have up to 4 disks. Now the same, if I am talking about a RAID, irrespective of whether it's a RAID 0, yes, flat cable with a red line on that. Okay, if I'm talking about your RAID volume, irrespective of whether it's a RAID 1, RAID 0 or RAID 5, the maximum amount of disk which you can have in your RAID volumes is 32. The maximum amount of RAID volume which you can have in your disks which you can have is your 32. Okay, so redundancy and speed are provided by breaking up the data and writing it across several disks. So different disk head can work simultaneously to retrieve the requested information. So now we basically have a stripping, we basically have a mirroring, and we basically have a parity. Now when I am talking about stripping, the stripping is also called as your RAID 0. The stripping is also called as your RAID 0. Now when I say RAID 0, if you want to improve the read and write performance, I repeat, if you want to improve your read and write performance of your data, then you basically go for the RAID 0 volume. So in the RAID 0, minimum we basically need 2 disks. Minimum we basically need 2 disks, and the maximum amount of disk which we can have is your 32. So now let's say if I have 2 disks, so like this is my disk 1 and this is my disk 2, and I have configured your RAID 0. Okay, I have configured your RAID 0. Now let's say if I am writing 10 GB of data, I am storing actually 10 GB of data. 5 GB of data will be written on disk 1 and 5 GB of data will be written on disk 2. So what is the advantage? The advantage is when as an end user, when you access the data, both the disk throughput will be used. So the read and write performance is significantly improved. So the read and write performance which you basically get in RAID 0, that is something which you won't get it in mirroring and parity. But the problem with the stripping volume or RAID 0 is that it doesn't provide your data fault tolerance. So if my disk 2 is gone, whatever data I have written on that disk 2, it is completely lost. It will not be recoverable. That is the reason why the RAID 0 doesn't provide your fault tolerance. Now the next is we basically have a mirroring. Now what do you mean by mirroring? In mirroring, we basically the another language of your mirroring is your RAID 1. So any question in the exam talking about OS fault tolerance, operating system fault tolerance. So now let's say I have a disk 1 and I have a disk 2. Okay, now this both are configured on RAID 1. Now in disk 1 I basically have a C drive which is of 50 GB. And disk 2 is also the size of my disk 2 is 100 GB. Now I have configured RAID 1 volume. So now tell me, what would be the total partition size of C drive? Will it be 50 GB only, or it will be 100 GB? Will it be only 50, or it will be 150 or 100? Will it be only 50, 150 or 100? The answer is it will only be 50 GB, because it is in the disk 1 it is consuming 50, which means from the disk 2 only disk 2 also it will consume 50 only. The remaining 50 GB it will leave. Now what is the advantage of configuring a RAID volume? Once the RAID 1 volume is configured and it is synchronized between disk 1 and disk 2, if I turn on my laptop or desktop and I remove the disk 1, means I physically disconnect my disk 1, still I will continue to run my operating system with disk 2. Okay, now if you want to perform this practically, you can actually do one thing. You can actually run a Windows Server operating system inside a VM and attach two virtual disks. You can do that in the VMware workstation as well. You can actually create two virtual disks, install Windows Server, convert it into a dynamic disk, and configure RAID 1. And then you do one thing, you turn off your VM and remove the disk 1. Still you will be able to run the operating system from disk 2, because RAID 1 is configured. So it provides mirroring. So whatever data is there on disk 1, it will simply mirror that in disk 2. So that is why we say OS fault tolerance is something which you get it on RAID 1. And RAID 5 is basically used as parity. So for database, so if you are like in database, we basically have a transaction log files, we basically have a journal file. So normally for databases and all, we basically have a RAID 5 volume. So now in RAID 5, the RAID 5 has a little different requirement than RAID 0 and RAID 1. Now, what is the requirement? In RAID 0 and RAID 1, we only had 2 disks. Minimum 2 is needed. But in RAID 5, we basically have minimum 3 disks is required. So basically, we have a disk 1, we have a disk 2, and we have a disk 3. Now many server engineers and server administrators, they have a confusion. What they say is that when we configure a RAID 5 volume within 3 disks, the parity is stored only on the third disk. Well, that is not the case. Okay, team, this is something which is a very big misconception which many of server administrator and server engineer is having. First of all, RAID 5 doesn't provide OS fault tolerance, so it only provides your data fault tolerance. And the parity is distributed equally in all the 3 disks. It is not only there on one disk, it is equally distributed on each disk. So now in this 3 disks, if I am configuring a RAID 5 volume, okay, parity is also stored as your RAID 5 volume. Okay. So now in this, if my disk 1 goes down, the data can be accessible from disk 2. So it can only sustain one failure. But if my disk 2 goes down, then you will not be able to access the data unless and until these 2 disks are replaced with the new disk, and these 2 disks will use the parity which is there on the disk 3 to reconstruct the data, and then you can access it. So that is what your RAID 5 volume is all about. So I believe the stripping, mirroring, and RAID 5 is clear for everyone.